Ben Friedman here from Film School Dropout. It is October 24th, about 8:30 p.m. as I'm recording this. And I'm just so excited for you guys to hear this episode. I've been sitting on this episode since July. We recorded this the day that the actors went on strike, that SAG went on strike. And so it was a very busy day for my guest. And I've had this episode ready to go, and I've just been so eagerly anticipating people to hear this episode. It might be my favorite one that I've recorded this series. No disrespect to any of my other guests. It's just what we talked about, the meaning that this movie had for myself and my guest. It was just a really powerful, really fun, really insightful conversation, and one that I really just enjoyed in ways that I didn't even realize I was going to enjoy going into it. I'd never met this guy before we had talked, and I can't actually say I'd ever heard his voice either, so I had only ever read his writing over at Variety. He's an extremely intelligent, extremely funny, extremely charismatic, very kind man, and I'm so thankful for his time. Joining me today for this episode is Clayton Davis over at Variety, a writer over at their magazine. You've seen him everywhere. He is just so insightful. He is so passionate, and I just love the energy he brought. Like I said, I've been sitting on this episode since July, and I've just been so excited for people to hear it. So without further ado, welcome to Silence with Clayton Davis, and I hope you all enjoy. We are recording, and today I have my guest, Clayton Davis, Senior Awards Editor at Variety and host of PBS's Actors on Actors. Clayton, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, and by great I mean I'm doing actually pretty fine. It's a weird time in the world.
It is a really weird time. Just for context, because I think it probably may come up today. We are recording this in July. You guys won't be hearing this till September, but today was the day the Actors Guild just announced that they're going on strike. So I've been reading all about that. So if that's just timetable for you guys, if you hear this and you're wondering what they're referring to, that's what we're talking about. And if anything happens between July, I think today is the 12th, 13th, and September 28th, that's the context.
Yeah, I'm probably dead by then.
Are you?
Yeah, I probably got hit by a blimp or something so obscure. I'm always like, when weird things happen, there's an even weirder thing on the horizon. So blimp attacks.
Has this been one of the weirder stories that you've been reporting on in the past since you've started with Variety?
You know what? I'm probably going to give myself away here. I think since I started at Variety, it's just been the weirdest time in Hollywood, period. The fact that I always would say this, the fact that I'm at Variety is weird, right? Because it started here September 2020 in the middle of a pandemic.
That's what I was going to ask.
And then went through that. Then I moved out to LA, went to I covered my first kind of Oscar ceremony outside of the Dolby the year that they weren't there. The year they were at the train station. And then my first in-person Oscar experience was...
Was that the Will Smith?
The Will Smith one. So I was like, guys, okay, you impressed me. We're good now. You can stop doing everything everywhere all at once. So yeah. It's just been a weird time period. But I'm grateful for this opportunity. Grateful to be here with you. Thanks for thinking of me.
Yeah,
and hopefully I don't end the world.
I hope so too. And I should probably announce we're talking Silence. I don't think I ever actually mentioned the movie title of which we're covering in Scorsese.
They would have figured it out.
Yeah, I hope they would have figured it out eventually. The big thing is, because I had the same experience, I graduated college May 2020. And so I started, going into the workforce, started working as a writer during that period. And it just became extremely bizarre. Everything felt so non-normal when I started, that to the point now where I'm at, where I'm just like, this still feels like relatively non-normal. And it's just every few weeks, there's a story that I'm just like, this is the craziest story I've ever read in Hollywood news. And it just kind of seems to keep going.
Yep. When there's one weird thing, a weirder thing happens. I mean, listen, when I when I left college in 2008-ish, 2007, 2008, there was a global meltdown and an economy that said, psych, never mind. You don't need to work ever, Clayton Davis. So I got laid off from like 3 or 4 jobs in a row. It's been a very crazy time everywhere, but I tried. I could be a very pessimistic dude, but I could also be a very optimistic dude. And the glass can be half empty so sometimes, but I'm looking at it as half full. Like, we're alive. If you're working out there, be grateful. It could always be worse. You think that the worst things happen, but there's always something worse that come around the corner. So I think we can be as grateful as possible.
Yeah, and just for clarification, because I'm familiar with you as a writer at Variety. What is kind of your background in film before this? Like, what were you doing basically before Variety? What were your interests growing up as a film fan, I'm assuming?
Yeah. So I'm originally from the Bronx, born in the Bronx, New York, and I grew up on the East Coast. I'm very, very East Coast, as you can tell by a Yankee hat I'm wearing right now. But I was, I loved movies, but I grew up in a very, it was inner city. We lived in like in the projects for a good long while, and then we moved to Jersey to a better neighborhood, but not flourishing education system. I knew I liked movies, but I couldn't like quite articulate that. I was one of those guys that went to college and had no idea what I wanted to do. I was very, very lost. And I used to tell people I wanted to be an actor because I could physically see. And when I hit the workforce, I didn't even really know I wanted to be a writer. And then when I was in 2005, a guy was looking for some writers for his website. I started writing for him. And in 2008, I started my own. And I did that for 12 years while also holding a day job as an assistant sales manager for an honor society. So I did that, but I was able to kind of do both at the same time. And then in the middle of a pandemic, I got an email from the guy that's now my boss. And he was like, hey, we have an opening here at Variety. It was July 29th, 2020. And they announced me on August 13th. And I started here September 1st. Like, it happened really fast. And I always say I'm like an accident in the industry because I wouldn't, even if I knew there was an opening here, I wouldn't have applied because I'm not good enough to work at Variety. And I'm also someone that's half Puerto Rican, half Black. There's not a lot of people of color in this space. So getting into this space seemed too far-fetched. But here we are.
Was there a moment when you're going through it where you find yourself like not even necessarily getting discouraged, which I'm sure you did feel, but you were just like, this is what I'm going to do, but I also just feel like I will never be of note of anything.
Yeah. That's this happened in 2020 when I was 36. Maybe the 36 years that preceded my life before that were pretty, it's part of kind of the game. You have sometimes, I have, like anyone else, I have good days and bad days. I'm pretty open about my struggles personally growing up. I loved movies. Like I also suffered from depression when I was, throughout my life. There's always been a little that dark cloud, but then there's times you're feeling really good, and there's times you're not feeling so good. So more so nowadays. Now coming up on 3 years here, my 3-year anniversary is coming up. By the time you listen to this, it would have already passed. I get imposter syndrome a lot. Like, it happens a lot. Every time it happened at the Oscars when I was there, like before Will Smith slapped somebody. Then I had an out of body experience. But there's a lot of times I'm sitting and I'm like, I know. And listen, this isn't even me trying to like self pat or anything. I know there are so many better writers than me because I read their stuff. So there are like 5 people in the entire world that have my job. Like, it's my dream job, and I wasn't even looking for it, and it came to me. And when they announced me, a lot of people, there are people that were like, "Oh my God, you're going Clayton Davis." He failed upward, and they use things like that. And a lot of it, yeah, they're right. Like, why me? But also, now that I'm here, I'm like, I'm going to make the most of it. I'm going to be grateful every day. And those days that I want to just scream, I'm going to be like, there's someone else that wants to do this. So stop bitching and moaning.
Yeah. I want to say real quick, just first to jump back on something that you said, you're one of the guys I read. So when I'm comparing myself to the writings of you and other guys that I read. And what was the moment for you? Like when you get to Variety, you're now, did you locate to Hollywood?
Yeah, I moved to LA in June 2021. I drove cross country while my family flew.
Mhm.
And I used to say all the time, I'll never move to LA. It's not my scene. If I made it, I was going to make it on the East Coast. And look at me. I live in. I've lived on the East Coast my entire life. I'd never lived anywhere but New York, New Jersey.
Mhm.
And I like when they said that I needed to move here, I wasn't sure. Like this is like a little bit of serendipity, but I wasn't sure if I wanted to. And my wife, who I love very much, she's Cuban and Puerto Rican, and anyone who's Latino knows that your wife really runs stuff. You do nothing. You have no power in your house whatsoever. So my wife says no to everything. So I was going to use her as my out and be like, no, I can't do this. We ain't no way she's going to move to LA. And the street we were living on, we lived 2 doors down from her parents. She had only lived on that street her entire life.
Yeah.
And so when I asked her, I said, listen, they want me to move to LA. She went, let's go. And I was like, damn it. It's like, all right, I guess we're going. And then we came. Sometimes you get forced into some really uncomfortable situations and you either accept it and attack it, or you don't and you miss out. You could miss out on a big opportunity.
What was the moment for you? Because I'm sure everyone who's been in this space for a while, we all get that moment where you're doing it and you like, specifically when you get to Variety, where it becomes real to you, where you're just like, oh, this is what I'm doing and I'm getting paid to do something I love. Like, what was that moment where it was like almost out of body experience for you, besides the Will Smith slap, which is out of body?
Yeah.
Millions of other reasons.
Actually, again, like serendipity, God, get spiritual, whatever you'd like. It was August 29th, 2020, and I can tell you why and why that date's so significant. I was supposed to start September 1st. And if anyone recalls, 3 days prior to September 1st, we lost Chadwick Boseman.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then I got a call on August 29th from my boss, and he said, listen, I know you started on the 1st, but would you like to pen a tribute to Chadwick Boseman? And that was the first thing I ever wrote for Variety, was a tribute to Chadwick Boseman, because again, not a lot of Black people in this space, and I was afforded an opportunity at a major publication with a huge platform to talk about why his loss was so significant in the Black and brown community. It was literally that moment, because at that point I hadn't even started yet. I was just here. And then got a call and they were like, can you actually do this? Would you mind doing this now? And I was like, sure. And I did.
One of the things that I find so interesting about the life you live is like when you post a picture on like social media, right? Like you're like standing, like the one I'm going to bring to example to kind of tie this all back together is I see this picture that I'll share on here. It's you sitting next to Martin Scorsese and getting him to talk to him about Silence, like the movie that we're going to be talking about today. That's got to be the most surreal feeling in the world.
So I've never met Scorsese before, and I've met some people over the years. Like, I was started my own website and I got some good notoriety about it. That's why some people found me. So I hadn't met him. I had never I'd seen him from afar, obviously, but I'd never got to actually shake his hand. And a few days before I went to Cannes, I got a call from a member of his team, and they were just like, "Hey, listen, when you're in Cannes, Scorsese would love to meet you." And I was like, "What do you mean me?" And I was like, "He wants to meet press, but why do you want to meet me?" She's like, "Actually, we were on a call, and he brought you up because on Scorsese's 80th birthday, I ranked all of his movies that he's ever made. Scorsese, for anyone who's going to know this shortly, is my favorite living director. He is he's my godfather, of cinema." So when I'm at Cannes and he comes in the room, like in the area, and I see his some of his team people that I know, and one of them I give him a hug because I hadn't seen him in like a while since I had moved to California, and then he turns around and Scorsese was behind him, and he brought him in. He was like, "Hey, Marty, this is Clayton." And he went, "Oh my God!" He was like, "Clayton." And I was like, "Sir." I was like "Hi." And then I was like, "Listen, the reason why I skipped a part. The reason why his team called me, they said he brought you up in a meeting because you penned that tribute to him and is ranked all his movies, and you put Silence #1, and he loves Silence. It's like his like baby." And I said, "Yeah, I know that, but I also it's my favorite movie of his." I didn't know that he had loved it like that. So when he was there, I got to like I was like, "Hey, listen, I loved you my entire life, and Silence is my favorite movie." He goes, "Mine too." And I was like, "Thanks, Dad." And then he like walked away. And then I sat with him for a little bit and we chatted. And I was just like, "Listen, like it was very like I couldn't even stay with him too long, not because they sat me with him and they said, 'Here, talk.' I could stay there for like 25 minutes, and I was like, no, I was like, I can't. Like I was already, I already felt like I was overstaying my welcome, kind of thing. I was already saying a lot, and I was like, 'Sir, nice meeting you.' I was like, 'Please enjoy the rest of the film festival.' I had just seen Killers, and I was like, 'Oh, by the way, it's fantastic.' And then I ran away, and I cried. I cried when I got home.
There's that moment for me too, because for me, when I've interviewed a handful of actors throughout the years, or I've talked or met a handful of actors, and I can usually keep my composure pretty well around an actor. I don't know what it is. It's when I meet a director that I really respect. And for me, it was Kevin Smith. For Kevin Smith, when I got to meet him like a year ago, and we were just talking about at that time, we were talking about Jersey Girl, which is a bizarre movie for me to be like, "Oh yeah, Jersey Girl," like that's you're doing it, man. Like I love it. And like that one, or even like there was this like VHS tape that I showed him of like a Kevin Smith Stan Lee like interview that they did that released. I got it at the 99-cent store like circa 2005.
Yeah.
And he's just like, we're talking about it. And I could tell he would, and very Kevin Smith like, he would talk about it. He would have spoken to me for the rest of the night if he was able to.
Yeah.
And that was the moment for me where I was just like, wow, this is a really surreal moment. Like, and it's the power, because it's the power of storytelling. Not saying that actors aren't a very important part of the storytelling, but it's the director who has the vision and everything that can come so impactful in my life. And Silence, to kind of bring it all back together as we start kind of jumping into Silence. Silence is the first Scorsese film that I get to see in theaters. I want to say that film comes out my freshman year of college, 2016.
Yep.
And so, you know, I at that point I tried sneaking into Wolf of Wall Street, didn't get in. I was too young to fully care about Hugo, and I didn't get that. Shutter Island and The Departed, obviously, like I'm too young for those movies when they come out. Silence is the first one I had seen as a film fan, going in and being like, this is Scorsese. And the reason I asked you on for this one is because I find that the people who really appreciate Silence appreciate it because there's a truthfulness to it in their lives or through their experiences.
Yeah.
And I love this movie because that's another reason I love Silence.
Yeah. So, I mean, hence power of cinema, right? So, what one thing I talk about often, and like you, so I don't get starstruck as much anymore. Like I probably like not really. There's very I could probably think of a handful of times in the last like decade that I saw someone and I was like like Scorsese kind of was one of them, but I was able to talk to him normal, but I just didn't want to stay with him for a long time because I was like, I need to go. I'm going to lose my shit in like 10 seconds. I need to walk. So I'm usually, because I really do see celebrities, directors as regular people. I've learned that they're just like you and I. They like movies. You know, some are jerks because they are jerks. Some think that they're bigger than what they are, and I'm just kind of like, you're a person, chill. So when it comes to Silence, and you alluded to this, any movie, when I think of my personal top 10 favorite movies of all time, they all mean something to me in the greater ether of life and cinema. Because when it comes to silence in particular, and up to that point, before I saw Silence, the Silence is 2016. My favorite movie of his was Raging Bull. Like that was my kind of jam. And something that also is always important to say is that just because someone's your favorite director doesn't mean all their movies are perfect and great and you love them all. Like I'm not that crazy personally about Taxi Driver. I'm
Yeah.
just not, and that's like a sin to talk about. But the second piece I wrote for Variety when I came here after Chadwick was introducing myself to the world, how I'm going to cover awards. And I said, there are cinematic gatekeepers in this industry. I'm an outsider. I see myself as I'm a regular dude from the Bronx, and I'm going to be that here. I'm going to be the bridge because I'm not snooty tooty, industry dude. I'm a guy that grew up in the projects and made it, and I'm going to be able to articulate my love of cinema through that lens. I've never seen, like, one of my big cinematic blind spot, which we all have, but I have one. I've never seen Casablanca. Now, easily I could watch it, and I understand I can watch it, but it's kind of like my thing, and I've kind of just held on to it for longer because I use it as a point that I've never seen it. And that's okay that I've never seen it. It doesn't mean I can't do this job, and it doesn't mean I can't love cinema and can't talk about cinema. Silence, bringing it back to Silence now. I grew up, went to Catholic school for a lot of my life. Went to a church youth group. I was religious, I guess, for a lot of my early life. The high school I went to, by the way, is the same high school as George R.R. Martin, the guy who wrote Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
I went to his high school. That's now closed. And high school got really, really deeply had a spiritual connection or very religious. And at one point considered being a priest. Like that's how I was in it, which, by the way, Scorsese did, which is why I could feel a lot of this. So since then, I have my big beef with religion, especially Catholicism, but I still consider myself very spiritual, and Silence is such a physical manifestation of my battle with my spiritual creator, whoever that ends up being. Like I see my inner battle on screen in scenes, and it's my favorite movie that year. It's my favorite Scorsese. I came out of it, I was like, that's his masterpiece.
Yeah, there's this really interesting thing, and because you're not the first one that I've talked to, and it's also kind of the reason that I relate to this movie. Obviously, the experience of it. I noticed the people who really relate to this movie, because I've talked to a handful of us, like, we're the ones who came with a very religious background into this movie, and specifically kind of had the same background that Scorsese had. I'll give just some brief. At age 18, when I'm in college my freshman year, I get baptized in the church, have that experience. So then I see Silence maybe 2 months later. And this is from one of my favorite living filmmakers, and also a guy who, if you've ever grown up in any kind of religious institution, Scorsese and Christian community can have a very complicated relationship, specifically after Last Temptation of Christ.
Yep.
Like, there's just a disconnect / distrust to some degree between the two. And so going into this movie, I didn't know fully what to expect, besides the fact that he's one of my favorite living directors. And at this point, I'm full on the rhetoric of religious institution, the idea of being a martyr, what that means, what it means to sacrifice your life in service of God. And so I'm watching that movie there. And now I watched this movie, and I haven't now seen it since 2016. I rewatched it these past few weeks in preparation for this. I rewatched it 3 times specifically to kind of prepare for today, because I found it to be such a complicated movie for me to then go back and where I'm now watching it like it's a different movie.
that's the really interesting thing where it's now like, I think it's like 8 years, 7 or 8 years old at this point. And I watch it and I'm like, this is a completely different understanding of this movie than I had at the age of 18
Oh
when
yeah.
I am so close with the church and with my own religion. And now with me, not again, not saying I'm not necessarily spiritual, anything like that, but now watching this movie, I'm like, oh, there's a real struggle to this movie, and there's a real ugliness to these characters at time.
Mhm.
And there's so many ideas of obviously Catholicism, Catholic guilt is it's best described, but also just it's a period piece set in 1600s, and yet it says so much about the modern day institution of the church, of religion, and kind of what happens growing up in that and then struggling with that, and how that struggle can feel so exasperated. And that's kind of why I love this movie. It's just because it's such an honest portrayal of something that I don't think, not necessarily that people don't even approach honestly, but it's one that's so complicated to even know how to talk about honestly.
One thing that, and I agree with so much of what you said, and one thing that really hits deeply for me, and this is like kind of goes into my own personal relationship with God and Catholicism. I was a religion teacher coming out of
Mm.
college for 3 years. Like, it's, again, remember, I'm telling you, like, I'm so deeply ingrained. And but I am one thing that Catholicism would preach when I felt like it was preaching when I first was really ingrained upon it, was that you, like, you can accept everyone for what they are, even if they believe in God or not. And as I got older, I realized how untrue that was within the eyes of Catholicism, because in the name of religion, humanity has done the worst things to each other. In the name of God,
Mm.
we is where we're at our worst. That doesn't I don't blame God for that. Religion and God are two separate things. I see them as two separate things. In Silence, why it gets really, like, profound, as is the build for Andrew Garfield's character, um, Rodriguez, is that when we're talking spoilers here, right? Like, we're
Yeah,
assuming that everyone.
please spoil this movie. Please go for it.
All right. If you haven't watched it, please go watch the movie. Then come listen to me. Rodriguez, his step onto the face of Jesus
Mm.
is such a slow burn build for me. And I think when you watch the movie on face value, you initially, and again, I've watched it many times because you kids. That's why that's when cinema is at its best. When I can watch a movie 7, 8 times and get something really different from stuff. Face value, first time I saw it, I remember, like, oh, plot twist, Ferreira is the bad guy. Sort of. Liam
Mm.
Neeson's the bad guy in this. But again, then you're watching and you're like, is he the bad guy? Is he a villain? Do we just treat it as survival? Being a martyr is something that is supposed to be an honor in all religions,
Mhm.
but yet we criticize other religions for how they do it. So, like, you know, when I was alive for 9/11, and happened right outside my backyard, and I saw it happen. You know, those people on the planes thought they were being martyrs, and we were like, "No, you're not. You're monsters." And but we're doing the same, different types of martyr
Yeah, of course.
system. That's when Catholicism. Silence really has the backbone to, and I'm saying this, and it's going to sound very, like, hyperbole. It
No,
has
go for it.
it has the backbone to change lives, in the
Mhm.
sense of, you question your own place, your personal relationship with God and what's important to it. Does it just exist within a building where you go on Sundays, or does it have to do with how you live your life? Because at the end, when Rodriguez is dead, and what he has in his hand, for me, some people say, "Oh, it's redemption." I'm like, no, I don't see that as redemption. The relationship never ended.
Ended, yeah.
He never stopped his relationship with God. He just stopped living within the confines of our reality of how we think we're supposed to be with God. Because you can't take that part away, that what you feel internally. And I really don't believe that God judges someone like Rodriguez for that. I don't believe that Rodriguez goes to hell because he denounces God.
Yeah. There's this moment in the film, because when I was rewatching it, I think I turned it on to rewatch maybe 2 or 3 weekends ago. And there was this point when, after I had booked you and I was like trying to think, where am I going to like kind of direct my focus on this movie? I was thinking about my first time watching this movie in 2016. I saw it with my mom at our local Cinemark. And the points of focus that I was probably focusing the most on in preparation for going into this was like, what do I remember? And I'm like, I remember the use of sound in the movie, which I still think is some of the best sound design maybe put to screen ever.
Mm-hmm.
I remember the performances, specifically Adam Driver was like the big one for me, and Andrew Garfield. I remember the final shot of the movie because that one was so profound to me.
Mm-hmm.
And then there were like other moments where I were like, I didn't necessarily remember the whole picture, but I remembered some of the brutalistic imagery in there that the Japanese commit to the missionaries. And rewatching this movie, I was so just struck by how much of the story was what was grabbing me. Like, because I really did think I was going to talk a lot about the technical aspects of the filmmaking and why I think that is so impressive for Scorsese. Watching it a second time, watching it a third time, watching it a fourth time, I was just so locked into this story that he's focusing on. And not that the technical aspects of the movie get like disregarded to me, because I think they are of a brilliant mind. Like, it's that this story to me was just something so complex. And there's the moment for me that I didn't remember it. And it's the moment where Guerrera, played by Liam Neeson, he's having the conversation with Andrew Garfield's character. And he's basically explaining like how you describe Jesus, they see it as the son, or like the actual literal son. And there's just this disconnect. And what does any of this actually mean? Like, we're teaching them Catholicism, yet they don't actually understand the Catholicism we teach. And what does that say about us? What does that say about our mission? All of that. And that was the moment of this film where I was just like, this is such a complex conversation to have. It's such a real look at it. And it's the reason, like I said, the screenplay is just so moving to me.
Yeah. I totally agree with you on technical merits of the movie, especially Richard Prieto's cinematography. For me, is what smacks me
stunning
every time. And my performance, I grab. I think Andrew Garfield is so great in this movie. It's interesting that year he's nominated for Hacksaw Ridge, and I'm just always like, Jesus, like he needs to be nominated for Silence, and that's, two faith-based movies he was in that year. But Itzy Ogata, who plays the Grand Counselor, who's essentially, I tell people, I'm like, he's essentially a cartoon character in this movie, like because the way he like so animated, but gets the job done. Like he really, really gets the job done. So what the movie does beautifully, and a lot of people, again, I feel like some movies are ahead of their time. And I think, and I always, when I talk about the Academy Awards, especially, people always like ask me, like, I got a very complicated relationship with the Oscars, right? I love the Oscars, and it's my job, and I'm a big Oscar buff, and I love Oscar history. but I also have not seen a lot of myself within the Oscars because, not a lot of diversity in Hollywood, spoiler alert. But why I think the Oscars matter so much is I feel like they are a time capsule and reflection of the time that we're in the world at that time. So a great example I always bring up, everyone remembers that Citizen Kane didn't win Best Picture. It was beaten by
How Green Is My Valley?
How Green Was My Valley. But December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor is bombed. And then the Oscar ceremony is a few weeks later. So everyone's looking for some type of joy in the shadow of a disaster. Network won 3 acting Oscars. Peter Finch wasn't really the favorite to win until he died a few weeks before the ceremony, and then he wins Best Actor. And I look at 2016, when I always tell people it's my favorite movie that year, Moonlight wins the Academy Award for Best Picture a few weeks after Sounds comes out. Sounds gets 1 nomination for cinematography, and that's it. It was like a late drop. People it wasn't. I typically, when I get to arguments with people about certain movies, I'm back and forth on one specific point. I never like to say, especially I'm going to use an example of when there's a kid that dies in a movie. I don't like to tell people, if you're a parent, this is really going to hit you differently. Because I feel like that's always a cop-out. And you don't have to be a parent to connect with tragedy.
Yeah,
right?
Of course.
And you don't need to be Catholic to connect with silence. But it sure does help.
That's the
thing.
In
both those regards. And I think it's an easier access for people. So I typically look at that year. I'm like, Moonlight changed the industry. Silence changed my life. Because, and both those things can be true at the same time. Moonlight is so important. I'm glad it won Best Picture. If Silence was there and I was an Oscar voter, I'd vote for Silence because I'm a purist that way. But Moonlight, I understand, means more to the ether of movie making. And again, both things can be true at the same time. Silence has an identity that's almost too ahead of its time. This was Scorsese's passion project. He wanted to make this for so long. And when you talk to Scorsese people, and I say Scorsese people who say oh, that's my dude. What's usually the big movies they bring up, Ben? They're usually Goodfellas, best one ever, man. And they're like, Dance Bulls beat it. And they yell bro about it. Or Taxi Driver, Robert De Niro, he kills it, man. They go to that stuff. When I did my list, and I do it as a hybrid of my personal favorites versus what those movies mean. I'm looking at Scorsese's ranking, and I put Silence number 1. I knew I was going to get crap for that, but I think it is the movie that will be discovered and rediscovered for decades. Goodfellas is Goodfellas.
Goodfellas will always be Goodfellas.
It's always going to be Goodfellas. Raging Bull will always be Raging Bull. And I love them both. And they're my 2-3 on the list of my favorite Scorsese movies. But Silence is different. It's you access something. Listen, I still believe I'm in the tail end of the true power of Last Temptation of Christ because I saw it so late in life. And I think that movie is going to climb because right now I think it sits 8 on my list. By the time I'm 50 years old, it'll probably be my number 2 or 3 because I haven't watched it as much as all the others, but there's something there that is connecting.
There's always this point that whenever we talk about how we discuss movies, how we rank movies, how we say which ones are our favorites, the thing that I always come back to is when did I see it? And what was I going through in my life at that moment that made me rank it basically number 1 or number 2? Because there's such a personal experience. as great as a director as Scorsese is, and he's probably the greatest living director, his movies aren't perfect. And it's kind of those imperfections of that is why I love those movies.
It's why they can make him perfect.
Exactly. It's like I just had a guest on for The Departed, and I was like talking about it. And Departed is one of my favorite Scorsese films, and I still don't understand the reason how no one figures out that Matt Damon is the rat in that movie. I'm just like how Leonardo DiCaprio is the rat in that movie. Like, he's the guy who just came out as a police officer and now joined your gang, and you guys can't figure out that he's the rat. Like, as a storyboard or as a storytelling beat, as a critic, I can look at that moment. I'm like, that doesn't really make sense. It doesn't affect that that's the first Scorsese movie that I see that means something to me. Like, that's where when we're talking about kind of the power of cinema, like, quote unquote, but also like that is what it is. Like, that's the movie of when I'm like, oh, the guy who becomes one of my favorite directors of all time, that's the movie that introduces me to him. And Silence has that also, just because, and we focus so much on Scorsese, one of the brilliant things of this movie is the actor choice for me. Andrew Garfield, you mentioned it for Hacksaw Ridge, which is still a bizarre nomination. And I actually think he's good in that movie.
Yeah,
like, I think he's legitimately really good. And I think he has some really moving scenes in that. The complexity that he is bringing into this movie is just astonishing to me. And when rewatching Silence, I was like, I kind of remember my first time watching Andrew Garfield on screen, not in Silence, but just like, I remember talking to other people when I'm in like high school, right before Andrew Garfield is about to become the biggest thing after Spider-Man. And I remember talking to people and I'm like, Garfield's like, got it. Like, this guy is one of the most talented actors I've ever seen. He's going to be a big star. So then when he pops up in Silence in a Scorsese movie, there's kind of an ownership to it that I have, where I just see it. I'm like, that's my guy. Like, that is the guy that I'm like, this guy has the talent. He's just one of those actors I love seeing. And
just to add to that, I think this becomes a really good example with someone like an Andrew Garfield, or just how you discover people, discover artists in this biz. You know, like Garfield at that time that Silence is happening. And this is like and by the way, I've met Andrew Garfield many times. Like, I see him, if I see him, I give him a hug. Like, him and I are cool. Like, very, very, we have a really good relationship. And actually have a really good time together when we run into one another. So Garfield during Silence, that era, I thought he was like one of the thirstiest dudes in the business. Like, thought like he just wanted it too much. And I saw Social Network and I was like, he's great in Social Network. Like, that was like, I was like, he's going to be something. And I felt like he was kind of chasing it. He's like chasing the fame, or chasing like the star, whatever that is. And the back-to-back of Hacksaw Ridge and Silence, which I think Hacksaw Ridge is actually a really good movie and probably way better than some people give credit for.
It's a complicated relationship.
It's a complicated relationship. Especially it's Mel Gibson, so there's that whole thing. But as I watch Hacksaw, I literally I can remember seeing Hacksaw and telling myself, "Oh, this is his Forrest Gump. Like, this is just his, like, this is him wanting it." And I remember thinking he was so ill-equipped for Silence. Like, really thinking he was like no, he's not going to approach it the way I hadn't read the book, and I just knew what it was going to be. I was like, I think he's just I thought he was too young for it. And actually, I still hold that opinion. I think he might have been slightly too young for the role. But there's a physical performance that I didn't see of him until we got down the line in his career. And now I think acting is a muscle. You have to work at it, and then one day, hopefully, you're Diesel. And I think he's in his Diesel phase. He now knows how to like really go for it. Scorsese was so great. What's so interesting about Scorsese, the first movie I ever saw of his on the big screen, not the first movie I ever saw of his, but the first one I saw on the big screen is The Aviator.
Yeah.
And he's done 26 narrative features. That doesn't include documentaries. The Aviator's 22 out of 26 on that list. and it's interesting. Sometimes you tell yourself and convince yourself that movie is much better than what it is. And The Aviator is one of the ones I've revisited the least. Also, not a huge fan of Hugo either, but it's fun. But it's fine because there are things I can appreciate. And if you told me to watch Hugo, I'd watch it.
Yeah,
and I'd watch The Aviator, still coming away with the same opinion. Like, yeah, this is kind of stale in some story arcs, and Leo is slightly too young for this.
Yeah,
Still, he didn't quite get into. He was stuck at 20 for like 15 years, and he couldn't look older. Then Departed, we were like, oh, look, he aged, he hit puberty. So like this is like the last of that for him. But Scorsese, I told myself that Aviator was so good and it should have beat $1 Million Baby and all that. That's not the case. And I think what's so great about a filmmaker like Scorsese is that it's his technical skill, his framework as an artist that I've loved so much. Shutter Island does this too, because Shutter Island has a lot of Hitchcockness to it. So does Cape Fear, obviously, because he's very big into Hitchcock. And you see, like he likes to throw some of those things in there, and it becomes fascinating. I love Shutter Island. I think Shutter Island is actually such one of his best. And Silence is arguably one of his unrewarding movies to a average cinephile. There's not there is something rewarding for you and I, obviously, because we're talking about it right now. But if you go in and watch it, you're like, where's my plot? Like once he steps on the face of Jesus, that for average Joe people isn't enough. You're like, that's your big get. And to talk about something that you were alluding to, I think, in your question about where you are in your life when you see these movies. I saw Silence. They screened it. I had my website at the time, so I was getting invited by studios to see movies for that were in the awards conversation. It was a late breaking movie. He had finished it like 2 weeks before screening it for the first time. I saw it in New York at the Academy the DJ Theater in New York. And it was like December, like maybe December 3rd-ish, like first week, and Trump had just got elected. And I was like, oh, like feeling really crappy. But I was still in that, I think all of us, by all of us, like people that may remember that days when Trump won the election, we really tried, I think, for like a month to convince ourselves that this isn't going to be the worst time of this isn't going to be the worst time of our lives. Like maybe he can just do it. So every time we would like give a little, we'd have to take it back. No, he is an idiot. Like maybe he's going to be terrible. He yeah, he's racist, but maybe he won't. No, yeah, he's going to be pretty terrible. So when we got to that point in December, I had been seesawing emotionally back and forth. So Silence became my spiritual cleanse of like the reminder that everything happens for a reason. I think politically it set me up weirdly for the next 4 years. Maybe now, whatever we are now. And that says something to what a movie can do for you. Sometimes the movies are just made for the time, or sometimes they're ahead of their time and they'll be for something later. Like important cinema and the rankings, and you said this too. I want to put a real exclamation point at the end of this. Silence is my number one, and it's fine if it's not yours. It's all subjective in the end because it's all art. We all interpret it differently. I love Scorsese, and some people may not. I remember I had a professor in college that told me that Spielberg was the worst living director.
Yeah,
and I was like, that's a choice. That's a sentence to say.
Yeah, it's subjectively like wrong, but
I was like, I can feel in my bone that you are the most wrong person I've ever heard in my life.
Yeah. But you can have that opinion.
But you can have that opinion. And he gave me his reasoning why he thought And I was like, oh, I don't think that's that, but sure. Like, and I think
yeah.
but I think where we are in this era of social media and sharing our opinions on movies, and even sitting here doing this podcast, I mean, people there are me screaming. When I said Aviator's 22, I bet you we can't hear them because they're listening, but they're gonna be like,
They'll be in the comments.
88 yeah, comments. Yeah, I'll see you in the comment section. Aviator 22, like what the hell, man? It's like masterpiece. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, cool. It's not for me.
Mm-hmm.
That's fine. I'm like, how can you talk about Scorsese and you haven't even seen Casablanca? Because I can.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I like movies.
It's because there's no gatekeeping. Like, if we're actually like film fans, you watch film.
Yeah, and I don't have to watch every movie.
One of my favorite movies of all time is Grown Ups. Adam Sandler's comedy Grown Ups, because at that time I'm 10 or 11 when that movie comes out, and they're the most important comedians in my life at that point.
Yep.
And I still hold that feeling. I'm still proud of that. And objectively, I know it's not the funniest movie of all time.
And that is always more like, listen, I tell people all the time, like, one of my favorite movies of 2004. Favorite movies of 2004 is, which by the way, same year as The Aviator, this is just a coincidence, is Team America World Police.
Yeah, it is.
I know that movie's problematic and horribly racist and horribly offensive and all that stuff. I know how to look at movies through the lens of the time, and and listen, I'm sure if I was, a Middle Eastern man, I may not find that movie funny, and that's okay. It's just like there are people that watch all the gangster movies and see Mexican cartel and Latinos being gangsters all the time, and I'm like really offended by it. I don't like Curb Your Enthusiasm because I always feel like they have horrible Latino tropes in it. And some people are like, no, man, it's so funny. It's like Larry David. Like, okay, that's fine. A lot of people tell me that and they're not Latino. And I'm like, yeah, you're not going to see it from my view. And that's okay. I don't think you're a bad person for that, but that's our disconnect. And that's fine. Scorsese has an ability, I believe, and he's done this with all his movies. He's done a version of this in movies. He's either very singular, and I think who he's trying to reach, like Silence. I don't think Silence is for the masses.
It's not for everybody.
It can't be. No. By the way, spoiler alert: no movie is. But Silence, I don't think he made that. He was like, I'm gonna make $300 million to the box office for this movie. He knew that wasn't happening. That's why he also cast Andrew Garfield. And like Adam Driver, he wasn't going for the big stuff. But then there are movies like The Departed. He's like, yeah, no,
it's a commercial play.
It's a
great movie. I love it.
It's my number 4.
One of my favorites.
It's so I actually, fun fact, before I got too big to be recognized by publicists, I used to get invited to test screenings all the time of movies. And I saw an early test screening of The Departed that doesn't end where it ends.
Really?
All the extra stuff that was in there. And I always believe, that version is actually kind of cool. Like, the version I saw that had some extra stuff. I even saw, I don't know if you know the film Margaret with Anna Paquin that staged Kenneth Lonergan's movie that was on the shelf for I saw the test screening that was 3.5 hours that Sidney Pollack was at before he died.
Mm-hmm. Oh, wow.
And my most embarrassing moment of my life was going up to him and saying, hey, aren't you Kenneth Lonergan? I actually loved you in Death Becomes Her. Because Sidney Pollack is in Death Becomes Her as the doctor. And his name is not Kenneth Lonergan. His name is Sidney Pollack. And he said, I'm not Kenneth Lonergan. I wish I was. And then I walked away. It's my most, and then it is the worst. It's when I'm an idiot. So, back to the Scorsese point.
Yeah.
He makes it for some are for him. Some are for everyone else. Silence is for him. But that just so happens to be, hey, it's for me too.
There's this aspect, and I want to start wrapping this up, but there's this moment that I think you identified so well with Scorsese, and it's this actor saying it. I've been noticing it a lot while watching his movies. One of my big criticisms with him as a director is that I feel like he cast actors just a few years too early. But what's so impressive about that is he's such a great identifier of talent, where it's just like he can tell Leonardo DiCaprio has the juice as an actor. And in Gangs of New York and Aviator, I don't quite think he's there. And I think De Niro gets better as he goes along in his career.
Yeah.
And I think the same is like true with Garfield. Like there's these actors, and then there's some like Adam Driver, where he just picks out and he's like, this guy is a talent. And Driver comes in swinging 100 in this movie. And I'm just like, he gets the assignment at all times in this movie. Yep. But it's just it's another just layer to Scorsese where I can watch a movie. I'm just like, even when and I'm not saying Andrew Garfield's miscast in this movie because I don't think that's true at all. I do think he is slightly young for it, but I do watch it and I'm like, this guy like identifies something that no other no other living director has really gotten to see in Andrew Garfield. And he can pinpoint that and he can put it in the movie. And it just speaks to me because that's how I view Andrew Garfield. I'm like, no one else is viewing him that way.
What's interesting, I think what you said is actually brilliant in terms of like he gets them too early. I think he gets them too early, but I think what even deeper than I'm gonna give him so much more credit probably than anyone will right now. I think he sees the potential of what they're going to become.
Yeah,
he knows that because such a good example is Gangs of New York. How Leo is just not right for that role, and I really like Gangs of New York, and that has been a grow on me over time movie. Because the first time I saw it, I was like, "This is boring as shit." But I was also in college and an infant, so as I get older, I was just like, "Oh, Daniel Day-Lewis is just eating this up." Mm-hmm. But then, and Cameron Diaz is not good in that movie. I think she's very good. Bad. Yeah, I think she's a very good actress, but she's just not good in that movie. But because Scorsese has this ability, and he's not the only one that has this ability.
Oh, no.
The imperfections are forgivable. Like the missteps are an innate quality of the movie. So, like, if he does Gangs of New York 10 years later when Leo's more seasoned and can do this and looks like he's not 20, then I feel like that fundamentally changes Gangs of New York, even though Leo will probably be better equipped to do it, and he probably could pull up the character better. And if he gave Cameron Diaz maybe 2 more months of voice coach lessons, maybe she can do an accent.
Yeah.
But then that fundamentally changes the movie. Does that make the movie better? No, actually, it probably messes it up.
Yeah, exactly. What he does so well, and it's this point that I love, and it's kind of my last point on Silence before we get to our questions. In Silence, he identifies that Andrew Garfield is maybe not the level of Liam Neeson or Adam Driver at this moment, and you feel it in the movie. Like, you feel Adam Driver and Liam Neeson acting circles around him, and you feel as an actor that Garfield is trying to match them and get there. But by character design of who that character is in the story, but also who Andrew Garfield is as an actor at that point of his life, he's just not able to get there because he's not as experienced as his true comrades.
Yeah. Well, I would say even like Adam Driver, who like dies from far away, like you can't even get up close and personal death with him. Like, there's a lot of those choices in those aspects, and you see, like I've seen this in Killers of the Flower Moon, which it's not out yet, guys, but it is.
I can't wait.
By default, I put it number 11 on the list of my favorite Scorsese movies because I was like, I just saw it. I can't just be like, but they're like, there are definite things that are not perfect about it. I think you could shave off the entire last 26 minutes and end it at a very particular moment that makes it maybe one of the most important films of the last like 25 years. But you don't end it there, so we have 25 more minutes, and then you're like, oh, I can think this can end. But Scorsese, he doesn't just make shit. And that's why I love about, like, they're like, and sometimes he gets it wrong, sometimes he's too early, or sometimes he's too late. Bringing Out the Dead, by the way, I always say it's a perfect example of getting an actor too late in their career, because by that time Nicolas Cage is an Oscar winner, and you snip him back a bit if you get him in 94. I think he's not so, like,
he's not
Nicolas Cage. He's not cagey about it.
Yeah,
you know. So those are always interesting stuff. But yeah, like, Silence is great. Kills of the Moon is great. Silence, Scorsese has something to say. I feel very lucky that he's still feeling like he can say it. He could easily Clint Eastwood himself right now and be like, and we could be like, stop making movies. Like, you're not doing anything anymore. Like, you haven't said something to me in a really long time. Like, you haven't said something to me since $1 Million Baby. Like, for me. Like, you haven't said anything about, like, your abilities.
The Sully slander will not be tolerated on this podcast.
And I actually like Sully. I think
I like Sully a lot.
I think Sully's fine. But, like, also, it's like, it's such a, like, it's a lob. It's like, it's good. Like, it's like, it's not, it's good. It's a good movie. But, like, I'm talking about, like, when you're a master, like, I don't think Scorsese has a lob. I mean, the people argue that, like, Shutter Island was like a lob. I don't think it was. I think he was really trying to do some stuff. But, like, I feel like he wants. Like, that's why he doesn't have a movie like every single year forever. Like, there is, like, some gaps here and there. So I'm happy that we still have them.
Yeah. With that all said, I just wanted to ask before we leave, and you've probably alluded to it, and probably most people know it from your variety. But can you give me your top 5 real quick
Of all time?
For Scorsese.
Well, Silence, definitely number one. Because, spoiler alert, we've talked about it the whole time. Then it's Raging Bull at 2. Favorite De Niro performance also of his entire career is Raging Bull. And interestingly, my favorite cinematography ever done in a Scorsese movie is in Raging Bull. Because if you guys ever, like, what TCM, maybe RIP, but maybe not. But TCM, when it used to really, like, do deep dives, I remember learning through that about the struggles of Jake LaMotta as the camera moves into the ring and then outside of the ring, and I just think it's so, like, amazing,
so cool.
Yeah. By the way, and that same Scorsese, but I just throws out, when I met Scorsese, like 10 minutes before I met Scorsese, I met Thelma Schoonmaker, who's his longtime editor. Yeah. And she held my hand for like 10 minutes. And I was like, this is the woman that touched the long versions of Raging Bull and Wolf of Wall Street, and she's holding my hand. So I have a little bit of Wolf of Wall Street and Raging Bull on my hand. So Goodfellas number 3, because, again, I recognize that it's what it means to most people. Great Ray Liotta, fantastic Joe Pesci,
incredible Pesci,
but not, like,
top tier Pesci.
But
Irishman are for me for Pesci.
Irishman is Pesci's best performance of his career, and Irishman, by the way, is fairly low on my list. But that's Pesci's finest work.
Like, Pesci for me is My Cousin Vinny number 1 for me, just because of the age again where I saw it. But, like, Irishman to me, like, I was just like, oh my god, this is like our best actor who just hasn't acted in 22 years, but he's incredible.
Like he should have won the Oscar. He was great.
Oh yeah, he should have.
4 is Departed. Again, I have to recognize it as it's his Best Picture winner, so it's what it means in the Oscar landscape. But one of Leo's best. Yeah. Top 3 for Leo.
Underrated Damon too.
I'm glad you said it is a very underrated Damon, and Damon. I
want him to do more like that.
Damon in that movie, I had to get Damon later, which is why Departed is such a good movie, because I think you're so concentrated on DiCaprio and Wahlberg.
And Nicholson doing Nicholson.
Well, see, and fun fact, I don't think Nicholson's very good in that movie. I think he overdoes it. He
1,000,000%, and I love it.
He's Jack at 1,000, and I was like, Jack, like, come back a little bit,
Got his own Dilla to set. What a legend.
Yeah, yeah. Oh my god, it must have been great. Very good Fear for Amiga also. But yeah, Matt Damon in that
Very
movie.
good.
Matt Damon is a discovery later on of like how goddamn good he is in that movie.
I agree.
And then left curveball number 5, The Age of Innocence.
You know what? It's one of the ones I haven't seen. It's one of the ones that when I'm doing this series, like there was an excuse for me to do this series where I'm like, okay, the few that I have, like Kundun or Age of Innocence or Boxcar Bertha that I haven't watched, this is kind of my excuse to watch these now too.
Watch it. They have it on Criterion. It's great.
I have the Criterion now.
Such a great Day-Lewis, phenomenal Michelle Pfeiffer, and because we can talk about, because like this is why it makes Scorsese so great that I can say this, and I'm talking about this about his 5th best movie. Like in hindsight, not a great Winona Ryder. It's not a great Winona Ryder in hindsight. It's like, yeah, because again, he saw the potential. And she's like she's right before Little Women. Like she's just coming off of Edward Scissorhands and he just nabbed her. And I'm like, probably you shouldn't have casted Winona Ryder. And it's funny, she's the one who gets the Oscar nomination for the movie and almost won.
Yeah, I actually think I have seen Age of Innocence. I think I saw it in high school or maybe college. I'm trying to think.
I saw it when I was younger, and I thought it was so boring.
That's what I remember of it, and I remember because Ryder's one of my favorites because I'm such a Burton fan that I grew up a lot with her films. But yeah, so I do remember kind of thinking that same thing. Before I let you leave, the last question: any actor right now that could work with Martin Scorsese who's never worked with Martin Scorsese? You got to name one name. What actor, actress is it?
God, dear Jesus, hold on, because like now I had a good name.
I don't think Christ is eligible for this category.
I mean, would Jesus work with Martin Scorsese? Probably not. Philip Seymour Hoffman.
Yeah, that was the answer that I've now actually heard multiple times. Was that
Philip Seymour
Hoffman should have been in it?
And I had to think about when I said that. I was like, was he really never in a Scorsese movie? And I had to like kind of go through. I was like, oh yeah, he hasn't. But he's like great. But yeah, like so good. That's who's not with us anymore. Living today, I mean, I think maybe we're 5 years too late on this, but Scorsese and Denzel is right there.
It's just like that's another just like obvious. I want it like just like if you're because it was the Meryl Streep when I answered the question for the first time. I'm like, well, Meryl Streep's never been in a movie with him. Like that's like the obvious answer for me. And I'm like, the obvious is also sometimes the right answer. Phoenix was my other one. Joaquin Phoenix. Just like,
Joaquin is a little bit of me said because that's my initial answer because like Joaquin is my favorite living actor right now, but a little bit of me feels like I feel like I could get Robert De Niro Raging Bull era out of him, so it seems too connected. But my real answer, because I want him to have an opportunity, and I believe he's such a gifted actor who's not afforded enough, is Andre Holland. I want him and Regina King. I want Scorsese to get his claws into them.
One last one I'll throw out, and I'm blanking on the actor's name. The guy from The Five Bloods, the main actor in The Five Bloods, is that
Delroy Lindo?
Oh my God! Rewatched that movie recently, and I'm just like, this guy should be in more movies with auteurs.
I mean, yeah.
Spike Lee understands how to use him perfectly.
Delroy's always been a really good actor. I think there's so many of the Delroy Lindos of the world. I'm like, if you had the right director, they would just get you. I'm not saying Spike didn't get him, but like he's the best part of The Five Bloods, which The Five Bloods is not like amazingly great, but Delroy gobbles that movie up.
Oh my God! That was my best actor winner that year.
That was mine as well.
That was just like, this guy's incredible. The only other guy that I would throw out, and it's because of that last point that you mentioned, where it's just like, if another director saw what I saw in you and I've seen you do, I think you'd be incredible. Sandler, like giving a similar energy to what he is able to bring in Uncut Gems.
Yeah,
I know Scorsese's moving a little bit away from the crime genre, it seems. I think there is a particular energy that Sandler can bring into any movie that I'm just like, I'd love to see you work with a guy
listen,
like him.
the truth is, and I think this is in favor of your answer. I believe most comedians can do so much. So like my initial answer when I remember preparing for this, and I was writing the answers down for you. Like when we're talking about who I want to work with Scorsese, I was like Jim Carrey, man.
Mm-hmm.
Jim Carrey, dramatic Jim Carrey is some phenomenal Jim Carrey, and and Sandler has it too. Because Sandler, like when he does drama, like it works. Like
Hustle was one of my favorites of last year, and I get it's a little bit of like not perfect, but it's just a movie I love.
I even think of him in like the Meyerowitz stories or Men, Women, and Children. Like Adam Sandler, like there's all comedians have this. I think there's a sadness that lives in them, and I've spoken with Sandler before. He was my podcast opening last year, and I got to talk to him a lot about his abilities, and he's great. He really is. He's really capable. So Scorsese, if Sandler would be willing to surrender to it, and that's what was the actor has to surrender to the style, I think it would actually be brilliant.
Because he could do what he did for Ray Romano in The Irishman, where I'm just like watching The Irishman, I'm like, Romano's sneakily like great in this movie.
Yeah.
But with that all said, Clayton, I'm so honored to have had you on this episode for Silence. Before I let you go, can you let the people know where to find you?
You can find me on the streets. No, you can find me. You can follow me at by Clayton Davis, BY Clayton Davis, on all the social media channels. That's where I am: Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, if it's still here by then, Facebook,
maybe Threads,
and Threads. I'm on Threads too. Yeah, I'm everywhere by Clayton Davis, so you can find me there.
Perfect. Anyway, guys, my name is Ben Friedman here from the Beniverse Movie Channel. Thank you all for watching. We'll be back tomorrow with The Irishman with Keith Phipps on the show. So thank you all for watching. Take care and bye-bye.